Daniel Mercer almost turned around the moment he saw who was sitting at table 9. His friend had promised him a blind date with her sister, one quiet dinner, one small step back into life after losing his wife and spending 4 years raising his daughter alone. But the woman waiting beneath the soft restaurant lights was not a stranger. She was Claire Bennett, his boss. Outside, snow swept across the dark streets of Duluth while Daniel stood frozen beside an empty chair, wondering how one innocent dinner could threaten the careful life he had built after grief nearly destroyed it. But this story is about more than forbidden attraction. It is about a father forced to face the past. He buried a woman, risking the career she fought to earn, and a second chance neither of them saw coming. Stay to the end. And before we begin, like the video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. 4 days before Daniel Mercer found his boss waiting for him at table 9, his life still made perfect sense. At 5:10 every morning, his alarm went off beside a half-empty glass of water and a framed photograph he almost never looked at directly. He never needed the second alarm. Daniel opened his eyes, reached across the nightstand, and silenced the phone before it could wake Sophie down the hall. The house was dark and cold at that hour. Outside, Duluth was buried beneath the blue-gray silence that came before sunrise. Snow rested along the porch rail. Lake wind pressed softly against the windows. Somewhere beyond the neighborhood, freight trains moved through the darkness with a low, metallic groan. Daniel stepped into the kitchen barefoot. Coffee first, then Sophie's lunch. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, crackers in the small plastic container she liked because the lid was purple. He checked her backpack where she had left it beside the kitchen table. Math folder, library book, science worksheet. Everything where it belonged. That mattered to Daniel. It mattered more than he liked admitting. By 5:45, breakfast was ready. By 5:50, he was standing outside Sophie's bedroom. "Rise and shine." A muffled sound came from beneath her blankets. Daniel opened the door. Only the top of her dark hair was visible. "Sophie, I'm sick. You weren't sick last night." It started suddenly. "What are the symptoms?" A pause. "School." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "Very serious. I know. Unfortunately, the treatment is going to school." She pulled the blanket down just enough to glare at him. Sophie Mercer was 9 years old and already capable of looking at her father in a way that made him feel as if he were the child being unreasonable. That expression belonged to Laura. So did the dark eyes. So did the stubborn little crease that appeared between Sophie's eyebrows whenever she decided a conversation was not over. Some mornings Daniel could see those similarities without pain. Other mornings they caught him without warning. This was one of the easier mornings. "Breakfast in 5, he said. Sophie sat up. "You always say 5 and then you start rushing me in 3. Because you treat 5 minutes like a philosophical concept." "I don't know what that means." "Neither do I. Get dressed." He turned toward the hallway. Behind him, Sophie said, "Dad." Daniel looked back. "Do normal families have schedules for breakfast?" "We are a normal family." "You put the school pickup time on the refrigerator even though it's been the same time for 3 years. Daniel glanced toward the kitchen. "That proves the system works." Sophie sighed with exaggerated suffering. Daniel smiled despite himself. Their mornings had looked almost exactly like this for 3 years. The same cereal bowls, the same scratched oak table, the same blue mug Daniel had once bought at a gas station because Laura had laughed at how ugly it was. The same hooks by the door for coats and backpacks. The same rule that shoes went beneath the bench and nowhere else. Daniel had built routine into every corner of the house. At first he had told himself it was for Sophie. Children needed stability. Children needed consistency. Children who lost their mothers needed to know what would happen when they woke up the next morning. All of that was true. It was simply not the entire truth. Daniel needed it too. He needed days that arrived in the right order. He needed coffee at 5:15 and breakfast at 5:50 and Sophie in the truck by 7:20. He needed his shift to begin at 8. He needed to leave the freight terminal by 5:15 whenever possible. He needed dinner on the table by 6:30. Routine had become something stronger than habit. It was the structure holding the rest of his life upright. 3 years earlier, Daniel had learned how quickly structures could fail. That Saturday, Sophie's soccer practice started at 10. By 9:30, Daniel was sitting in a folding chair beside the indoor field with a paper cup of coffee between his hands. Outside, snow blew across the parking lot. Inside, children ran beneath fluorescent lights while parents shouted encouragement from rows of metal bleachers and folding chairs. Daniel preferred the folding chair. It meant he could sit near the exit. Aaron Bennett dropped into the chair beside him with 2 coffees and a paper bag. "I brought bribery." Daniel looked at the bag. "What's in it?" "Blueberry muffin. I already have coffee." "That's not what I asked." Daniel accepted the muffin. Aaron smiled. She had been Sophie's teammate Lily's mother for almost a year, and Daniel's friend for perhaps 6 months, though he would never have used the word friend out loud until recently. Aaron was easy to know. She filled silence without demanding anything from it. She remembered Sophie's birthday. She brought extra orange slices for every child. She once changed Daniel's flat tire in the soccer parking lot while he was inside helping Sophie after she twisted an ankle, then refused to let him pay for the repair kit. Daniel trusted people slowly. Aaron had never seemed bothered by that. She watched the girls warm up for a moment. Then she said, "Friday." Daniel did not look at her. "No, you don't even know what I'm asking. Friday means dinner. Maybe I wanted to ask if you're available to help me move a refrigerator." "I'd rather do that." Aaron laughed. "You are exhausting." "I've been told. One dinner." "No, one normal adult dinner with another normal adult." Daniel took a bite of muffin. "That sounds suspicious already." "My sister is smart." "No." "Kind." "No." "Employed." "Congratulations to her." "Beautiful." Daniel looked at Aaron. "That's unfair." "So you admit you heard that part?" "I heard all of it. And I said no." Aaron folded her arms. "Daniel, you work too much." "I work normal hours." "You leave work, pick Sophie up, make dinner, check homework, wash dishes, watch half an episode of some crime show, fall asleep on the couch, and repeat. You know an uncomfortable amount about my schedule. Because you talk about schedules like other people talk about vacations." Daniel looked back toward the field. Sophie was jogging past the goal with her ponytail bouncing behind her. "I'm fine." Aaron's expression softened. "You're functioning." Daniel said nothing. "That's not the same thing." He turned toward her. There was no pity in her face. That was probably why he stayed seated. He had learned to recognize pity almost instantly after Laura died. People lowered their voices around it. They touched his arm. They said things like, "I can't imagine." Daniel always thought the same thing. "Good. Don't." Aaron had never spoken to him that way. She had never treated him like a widower before treating him like Daniel. That mattered. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," he said. "Then say yes." "No." "That doesn't sound appreciative." Daniel almost smiled. On the field, a whistle blew. The girls ran toward the sideline for water. Sophie jogged over, cheeks flushed. "Can I have my bottle?" Daniel handed it to her. She drank, then glanced between him and Aaron. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," Daniel said. Aaron said, "Your father's afraid of dinner." Daniel looked at her. "Slander." Sophie lowered the bottle. "Why, I'm not afraid of dinner." "Then go." Daniel blinked. "Go where?" "To dinner. You're missing several important details." Sophie shrugged. "You tell me I have to try new things before I say I hate them." Aaron pressed her lips together to hide a smile. Daniel stared at his daughter. Sophie took another drink. "You said that when I didn't want to play soccer." "That was different." "How?" Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing arrived. Sophie smiled. Exactly like Laura used to smile when she knew she had won. "Fine," Daniel said. Aaron sat up straighter. "Fine means yes. One dinner." Aaron slapped both palms against her knees. "Friday, 7:30. Daniel pointed at her. "No photographs." "Fine. No social media investigation." "I wasn't going to suggest that." "You were absolutely going to suggest that." Aaron grinned. "First name only. That's ridiculous." "Her name is Claire." Something about the name registered for half a second. Daniel knew a Claire, but Duluth had tens of thousands of people in it. Claire was not exactly rare. Besides, Aaron had told him almost nothing about her sister's career. Daniel knew she worked in transportation management somewhere in the region. That description covered half the businesses along the western edge of Lake Superior. He had never asked. Aaron had never volunteered more. Soccer had become one of the few places in Daniel's life where nobody needed him to be a supervisor. A former engineer or the man whose wife died in an industrial collapse. He preferred it that way. Across town that same afternoon, Claire Bennett stood alone in the regional offices of North Shore Freight with the lights off in every room except her own. The building overlooked a stretch of industrial waterfront where cranes rose above warehouses and frozen rail lines. At 6:30 on a Saturday evening, nearly every desk was empty. Claire's was not. A stack of operating reports sat beside her laptop. Shipping numbers, labor costs, equipment availability, fuel expenses. Every column neatly organized, every problem waiting for someone to decide what mattered most. Claire tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and read the same paragraph for the third time. Her phone buzzed. Aaron. Claire let it ring twice before answering. If this is about dinner, no, that is not a greeting. Hello, Aaron, if this is about dinner, no. Too late. Claire leaned back. What did you do? Found someone. That sentence has never ended well. His name is Daniel. Claire's fingers stopped above the keyboard. The pause was small. Aaron noticed anyway. Interesting. What? You went quiet. I'm reading a report. At 6:30 on Saturday. Some people have jobs. I have a job. You sell houses. Yes, houses notoriously sell themselves. Claire smiled despite herself. Tell me about him. No. Claire frowned. You called specifically to set me up with someone and now you're refusing to tell me anything. Correct. Aaron. His name is Daniel. He has a daughter. He's smart. He's quiet until he trusts you. He's annoyingly responsible. That's all. Claire looked through the office window toward the dark terminal below. A supervisor crossed the yard beneath the floodlights carrying a clipboard. For a moment, Claire thought about another Daniel. Daniel Mercer. She had worked above him in the reporting structure for 16 months. Not directly every hour of every day, but directly enough that his name appeared on documents she approved. He was the sort of employee executives liked because problems became smaller when they reached him. He arrived early, never exaggerated, never complained in meetings. When workers made mistakes, he corrected them without humiliating them. Claire had noticed him during her first week at the Duluth terminal. She had told herself it was because he was competent. Months later, she was still telling herself the same thing. Daniel what? Claire asked. No last name. Claire looked away from the window. That's absurd. No searching him. I wasn't going to. You absolutely were. Claire smiled faintly. Her sister knew her too well. Aaron continued. Friday, 7:30, Harbor House, table 9. Claire hesitated. Fine. There was silence on the line. Then Aaron said, That was suspiciously easy. Don't make me reconsider. I love you. Goodbye. Claire ended the call. For several seconds she sat motionless. Then she turned back toward the operating report. She read the first line. Nothing registered. Daniel. It was a common name. That was all. Claire closed the report anyway. Her own apartment was 15 minutes from the office. It had hardwood floors, tall windows, expensive furniture, and almost no evidence that a person lived there. A framed photograph of Claire and Aaron stood on one shelf. 3 unopened moving boxes remained against the wall of the spare bedroom 18 months after Claire had moved in. She had always intended to unpack them. There had simply always been another report, another terminal, another board meeting, another reason to stay late. Claire's career had been built through a combination of discipline and suspicion. Her father had spent 30 years in Great Lakes shipping. His name still opened conversations Claire wished she could enter without it. When she was 25, an executive had congratulated her on a promotion by saying her father must be proud of the doors he had opened. Claire never forgot it. From that day forward, she worked as if every room contained someone waiting to decide she had not earned her chair. When North Shore Freight chose her as regional director over Grant Keller 18 months earlier, Claire understood exactly what people whispered. Grant had been with the company longer. Grant knew the board. Grant had expected the position. Claire got it anyway. She responded by working harder than anyone could reasonably require. She learned names, visited terminals, read maintenance reports, walked freight yards and whether senior executives normally watched through windows. That was how she met Daniel Mercer. At first, she knew him only as the safety supervisor who never wasted words. Then she began noticing details. The way he checked his watch at 5:10, the way he left quickly whenever his shift ended on time, the photograph of a little girl tucked behind his employee identification card, the wedding ring he no longer wore, though a pale line had remained on his finger during Claire's first months at the terminal. She had never asked. It was none of her business. That phrase had become useful. She used it whenever Daniel crossed her mind outside work. 4 nights later, Daniel stood in his bedroom staring at 3 shirts laid across the bed. Sophie stood in the doorway. The blue one. Daniel looked at her. You didn't even think about it. The gray one makes you look like you're going to a funeral. He went still. Sophie noticed immediately. Her expression changed. Sorry. Daniel picked up the blue shirt. It's okay. She watched him button it. Are you nervous? No. You changed shirts twice. They didn't fit. They fit yesterday. Daniel looked at her through the mirror. You have homework. I finished it. Read something. I already did. Go become mysteriously busy somewhere else. Sophie smiled. Do you know her name? Claire. Is she nice? I haven't met her. Erin says she's nice. Erin is related to her. That doesn't mean anything. I know you. Daniel laughed before he could stop himself. Sophie stepped farther into the room. Mom would want you to go. The words were quiet. Daniel's hands stopped at his collar. Sophie rarely mentioned Laura directly, not because Daniel had forbidden it. He had done the opposite. There were photographs around the house. Stories were allowed, questions were allowed. Still, grief had its own instincts. Children learned where silence lived. Daniel looked down at his daughter. You don't have to worry about me. I'm not. Good. I'm just saying. He crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level. Going to dinner doesn't mean anything. I know. It doesn't change anything. I know. Sophie looked at him with Laura's eyes. You always say that before things change. Daniel had no answer for that. 3 years earlier, change had arrived on a Tuesday morning. Daniel had been 35. Laura had been 34. They were both structural engineers working for different firms, but often crossing paths on industrial projects around Minnesota. Laura was better at reading failure. Daniel had always admitted that. She could look at a beam of connection, a photograph of cracked concrete, and understand the story of stress moving through it. 2 days before she died, Laura flagged a formation in a warehouse support frame outside Minneapolis. The project was already behind schedule. The operations manager wanted another week. Laura wanted one section evacuated immediately. Emails went back and forth. A temporary inspection was scheduled. Laura went inside with 2 other engineers. The frame failed before noon. Daniel remembered the phone call more clearly than the funeral. He remembered standing in an office hallway with someone speaking into his ear while every sound around him seemed to move farther away. He remembered driving too fast. He remembered the hospital corridor. He remembered seeing Laura's coat folded over a plastic chair. 6 weeks later, Daniel resigned. His manager tried to talk him out of it. Daniel emptied his desk anyway. He boxed certifications he had spent years earning, licenses, reference books, photographs. Laura's old mechanical pencil that had somehow ended up in his drawer. He moved north with Sophie, took a position at North Shore Freight that required experience, but not the responsibility he no longer trusted himself to carry. At the terminal, the worst possible day was supposed to mean delayed cargo, missed schedules, angry customers. Nothing that ended with someone folding a dead woman's coat over a hospital chair. That was the life Daniel believed he had chosen. Safe, predictable, contained. At 7:26 Friday evening, he parked outside Harbor House. At 7:32, he stood beside Table 9 and discovered Claire Bennett waiting for him. Now, nearly 20 minutes into dinner, the shock had softened enough for conversation to exist. Claire took a sip of water. How long have you known Erin? About a year. And she never mentioned me. She mentioned a sister. Claire raised an eyebrow. That's flattering. She said you work too much. Less flattering. She also said you're stubborn. Claire smiled. That sounds more accurate. Daniel looked down at his menu. I told her almost nothing about my job. I don't talk to Erin much about mine either. Apparently. A quiet laugh passed between them. The awkwardness loosened. Not completely. Enough. Claire studied him for a moment. Why freight? Daniel looked up. What? You don't think like a freight supervisor. He smiled faintly. That's either a compliment or an insult. It's an observation. She leaned back. You read engineering reports faster than half the engineers who send them to me. Daniel looked toward the window. Outside, snow moved through the streetlights. For 16 months he had avoided this conversation. Somehow it felt harder to avoid it beneath candlelight. I used to be an engineer. Claire did not react immediately. What kind? Structural. Licensed. Yes. Why did you leave? Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire noticed. You don't have to answer. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, My wife was an engineer too. Claire's expression changed. Daniel continued before he could reconsider. Her name was Laura. The name felt strange in a restaurant, alive in a way it did not feel at home. She found a structural problem on a project. Management didn't shut the site down when she recommended it. Claire's hand settled beside her water glass. The structure failed. Daniel nodded. She was inside. Claire did not offer sympathy. She did not reach across the table. She simply sat with the truth. After a moment she asked, Was she good at what she did? Daniel looked at her. Very. Better than you. A faint smile touched his mouth. She thought so. Did you? Most days. Claire smiled softly. For some reason that was easier than hearing I'm sorry. Daniel relaxed a fraction. I quit after she died. Because you blamed yourself. He looked back at her. Claire added, You don't have to answer that either. Daniel considered it. I blamed everyone. His voice was quieter now. Then I got tired of being angry. After that I just didn't want to be responsible for anything that could kill someone if I was wrong. Claire looked at him for a long moment. So you came here. I needed something steady. And Sophie... Daniel's face changed immediately. The heaviness lifted. Claire saw it happen. She's 9. You have a picture. Daniel reached for his phone faster than he meant to. He showed Claire a photograph of Sophie beside a science fair volcano. Safety goggles crooked across her face, red foam covering half the kitchen counter. Claire laughed. What happened? She doubled the vinegar because the first eruption wasn't dramatic enough. I like her already. That's because you didn't clean the ceiling. Claire handed the phone back. I never had kids. Daniel looked at her. Never wanted them. She traced one finger around the base of her water glass. I don't know. That answer surprised him. Claire continued. I spent most of my 20s trying to prove I could do the job in front of me. Then most of my 30s doing the next job. Somewhere in there, everyone else apparently made decisions about marriage and children. Daniel smiled. You still have time to make irresponsible choices. Claire looked at him. Is that your parenting philosophy? No, Sophie's. That sounds dangerous. It is. The waiter brought dinner. Conversation became easier after that. They talked about Duluth winters, Aaron's matchmaking habits, Sophie's obsession with drawing ships that had too many sails. Claire admitted she had once killed a cactus. Daniel refused to believe it. She insisted the cactus had been unreasonable. At some point, Daniel forgot to check the time. Claire noticed. She said nothing. When they finally stepped outside, snow had covered the parked cars in a thin white layer. The cold air struck Daniel's face. Claire pulled on her gloves beside her car. For a moment, neither seemed certain how to end the evening. The professional answer was obvious. The personal one was not. Claire looked toward the restaurant. Monday changes nothing. Daniel nodded. Monday changes nothing. She opened her car door, then stopped. That sounded more convincing in my head. Daniel smiled. Mine too. Claire looked at him for one quiet second. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Claire. He watched her taillights disappear into the snow. On the drive home, he took the long way without realizing it until he was already passing the dark waterfront. The cranes stood against the night sky like black skeletons. Daniel usually drove past without looking. That night he looked. Then he kept driving. At home, Sophie was asleep on the couch beneath a blanket, one sock missing a book open against her chest. Erin had stayed with her. She rose from the armchair when Daniel came in. "Well?" Daniel took off his coat. "It was dinner." Erin stared at him. "That's all I get. That's all." "Did you like her?" Daniel walked toward the kitchen. "Good night, Erin." She smiled behind him. Daniel did not see it. He carried Sophie upstairs, tucked her into bed, and stood in the hallway after closing her door. His house looked exactly as it had that morning. Same clock, same photographs, same shoes beneath the bench, same life. But when his alarm sounded at 5:10 Monday morning, Daniel lay awake for several seconds before turning it off. For the first time in years, the schedule waiting for him did not feel entirely predictable. By 8 o'clock, he was standing at the back of the terminal conference room while Claire Bennett walked to the front with a clipboard in her hand. She looked at him once. Only once. "Good morning, everyone," she said. Daniel folded his arms across his chest. "Morning, Miss Bennett." "Good morning, everyone," Claire said. Her voice carried across the conference room with the same calm precision Daniel had heard every Monday for 16 months. He stood at the back near the whiteboard, arms folded work jacket still cold from the walk across the yard. "Morning, Miss Bennett." The words sounded normal. That was the problem. Everything looked exactly as it had the week before. Forklift assignments were reviewed, 2 late rail cars were discussed, weather delays along the interstate had shifted one outbound schedule by 6 hours. Claire moved through each item without hesitation. Daniel answered when she called on him. No pause, no smile, no indication that 3 nights earlier they had sat beneath candlelight discussing dead wives, ruined cactus plants, and the strange number of sails Sophie believed a cargo ship should have. Nobody in the room noticed anything. Daniel noticed everything. The way Claire tucked her hair behind one ear while reading a report. The way she avoided looking toward him unless the conversation required it. The way she said Mercer instead of Daniel. He had heard her use his last name hundreds of times. It had never felt like distance before. The briefing ended at 8:17. Claire closed her folder. "That's all. Stay warm out there." Chairs scraped across the floor. Supervisors filed into the corridor, continuing conversations about equipment and schedules. Daniel remained near the door. Claire noticed, but she kept gathering papers until the room emptied. When the last person disappeared, Daniel closed the door. Claire looked up. "That feels dramatic. I can ask for a transfer." She stopped. Daniel continued. "West Yard has an opening. Different operations chain. Different reporting structure." Claire leaned against the edge of the table. "Is that what you want?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Neither pretended not to notice. Daniel rubbed one hand across the back of his neck. "But it would make things cleaner." "Cleaner for who?" "For you." Claire's expression tightened. "I don't need you rearranging your career to protect mine." "I'm not talking about my career. I'm talking about appearances. Nothing happened. We went on a date. One accidental dinner. People don't care whether it was accidental." Claire studied him. Daniel lowered his voice. "You know this place. Someone sees us leaving the same restaurant, and by lunch, the story becomes something else." Claire glanced toward the closed blinds on the conference room window. "Then we don't give them anything else." Daniel looked at her. Claire continued. "We do our jobs. You report what you need to report. I make the decisions I need to make. And Friday," her eyes met his. Friday was Friday. Daniel waited. Claire's voice softened. "I liked Friday." That landed somewhere behind his ribs. She looked away first. "But liking it doesn't mean we behave recklessly." Daniel gave a small nod. "No transfer. No transfer." He opened the door. Claire stopped him. "Daniel." He turned. For 1 second she was no longer the regional director. Then the expression disappeared. "Your daughter was right about the volcano." Daniel almost smiled. "About what?" "It needed more vinegar." He stared at her. Claire picked up her folder. "Go to work, Mercer." He left laughing quietly. It was a mistake, not the conversation. The laugh. Grant Keller heard it from halfway down the corridor. Grant stood beside the operations office speaking to a dispatch manager when Daniel stepped out of the conference room. Daniel's expression settled before he reached them. Grant watched him pass. Then his eyes moved toward Claire's closed door. He said nothing. Grant had built most of his career on noticing small things before other people understood they mattered. A delayed signature, a nervous manager, a board member changing language between one quarterly meeting and the next. He had spent 7 years at North Shore Freight learning when to speak and when to wait. 18 months earlier, he had believed that patience was about to pay off. The regional director position had opened after his predecessor retired. Grant had more years in the company than anyone else being considered. He had run major terminal expansions. He knew the board. He knew the numbers. He had already imagined which office he would move into. Then Claire Bennett arrived. The announcement meeting lasted 23 minutes. Grant shook her hand afterward. "Congratulations." He smiled. He meant none of it. Claire did not fail. That irritated him more than the promotion itself. She learned the terminals quickly. She remembered details. Workers respected her because she spent time on the yard. Executives respected her because her numbers improved. Grant waited for arrogance. There was none. He waited for hesitation. Very little. He waited for a mistake large enough to become useful. So far, nothing. Now Daniel Mercer was leaving a private room after everyone else, laughing. Grant filed the image away. Out on the yard, Daniel spent the next 3 hours trying not to think about Claire. He succeeded for nearly 6 minutes at a time. A late shipment helped. So did a forklift with a hydraulic leak. By noon, cold air had turned his face numb enough that he could almost believe Friday night had happened to somebody else. His phone buzzed inside his jacket. Sophie. He stepped into a quieter corner near the loading office and answered the video call. Her face filled the screen. She was wearing a red knit cap indoors. Daniel frowned. "Why are you wearing a hat?" "Because I'm sick." "You're at school." "Nurse's office." His expression changed immediately. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Sophie, I have a cold." "Do you have a fever?" "A little." "How little?" "I don't know. Nurse numbers." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Give me the nurse." Sophie pulled the phone closer. "Dad." "What?" "Don't do the voice." "What voice?" "The emergency voice." "I don't have an emergency voice." "You do. It's the one where your eyebrows get angry." Daniel glanced toward the yard. "When can I pick you up?" "Erin already said she can." "You called Erin before me." "I knew you'd leave work." "Of course I'd leave work." "Exactly." Daniel heard laughter behind Sophie, probably the nurse. "You're 9. Almost 10. That sentence is becoming a problem." Sophie smiled. She lifted a sheet of paper toward the camera. "I drew another ship." Daniel studied it. The hull took up nearly the entire page. 3 enormous sails rose above a cargo vessel that should not have had any sails at all. That's not how freighters work. "I know." "Then why does it have sails?" "They look better." Daniel shook his head. "Engineering standards exist for a reason. It's art." "That argument is dangerous." Sophie tilted the drawing. "Do you think Claire would like it?" Daniel went still. "What?" Sophie grinned. "The dinner lady." Daniel looked around instinctively, as if someone might have overheard through the phone. "How do you know her name?" "You told me." "I told you her first name. That's still her name." Daniel lowered his voice. "Why are you asking if she'd like your drawing?" Sophie shrugged. "You smiled when you came home." "I smile. Not like that." Daniel stared at her. A voice called Sophie's name in the background. She looked away. "Erin's here. Call me when you get home." "I will." "And drink water." "I know." "And no soccer tomorrow if you still have a fever." Her expression collapsed. "Dad, not negotiating. You ruin everything. I love you too." She ended the call. Daniel slipped the phone into his jacket. "You have a daughter." He turned. Claire stood several feet away holding 2 paper cups. Daniel glanced toward the phone. "Apparently. She all right?" "Cold. Erin's picking her up." Claire held 1 cup toward him. "Coffee." Daniel looked at it, then at her. "You brought me coffee. You missed lunch." "How do you know I missed lunch?" Claire's expression remained perfectly neutral. "You've been walking around with the same unopened sandwich since 11:30. Daniel looked down. The plastic bag was still sticking from his jacket pocket. Claire lifted the cup slightly. "Coffee." He accepted it. Their fingers brushed, barely. Both felt it. Claire withdrew her hand first. Daniel stared at the cup. No one can ever know about this? Her brow lifted. The coffee. It's wildly inappropriate. Drink it before I reconsider. She turned toward the loading lane. Daniel watched her walk away, then caught himself. A forklift passed between them. When it cleared, Grant Keller was standing near the entrance to the operations building. His gaze moved from Claire to the coffee in Daniel's hand. Daniel felt something tighten in his stomach. Grant gave him a small nod. Daniel returned it. Neither spoke. That evening, Sophie was stretched across the living room couch beneath 2 blankets when Daniel came home. A thermometer sat on the coffee table beside a half-empty glass of juice. Aaron had left soup in the refrigerator. Daniel checked Sophie's forehead. She opened one eye. You're doing the emergency eyebrows again. You still warm? Less warm. He picked up the thermometer. She groaned. Again. Again. Sophie sat up reluctantly. While they waited, she studied him. Daniel knew that look. What? Nothing. What, did you talk to Claire today? Daniel nearly dropped the thermometer. Sophie, what? Why are you interested in this? Because you're weird. I'm not weird. You put salt in the refrigerator yesterday. Daniel paused. That has nothing to do with Claire. You've never done it before. That's circumstantial evidence. Sophie narrowed her eyes. What's that? Something you don't need to know. The thermometer beeped. Daniel looked at it. No fever. He relaxed. Sophie saw it. Can I go to practice tomorrow? We'll see how you feel. She leaned back. That means no. It means we'll see. Daniel stood. Sophie called after him. Dad. He turned. She pulled the blanket under her chin. If you like her, that's okay. The room seemed quieter. Daniel did not answer immediately. Sophie looked toward the dark television screen. I remember Mom. I know. Not everything. Daniel's chest tightened. She continued. I remember her singing in the car and burning pancakes and that yellow raincoat she wore. Daniel smiled faintly. She hated that raincoat. Then why did she wear it? Because you liked it. Sophie looked back at him. You liking somebody doesn't make Mom disappear. Daniel swallowed. I know. But the truth was more complicated. He knew it intellectually. His heart had not caught up. He crossed the room, kissed the top of Sophie's head, and carried her empty glass toward the kitchen. Behind him, Sophie said, Also, you should stop putting salt in the refrigerator. Daniel laughed. At work the following morning, the yard was wrapped in lake fog. Visibility beyond the loading lanes was poor. Steel structures rose through the white air like unfinished buildings. Daniel walked the equipment line with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. The temperature had climbed enough for ice to begin melting from the crane platforms. Drops of water struck the concrete in slow, irregular rhythms. He stopped beneath Crane 6. Something about the machine had bothered him for weeks. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. A sound, a vibration, a maintenance notation that appeared too often. Crane 6 handled bulk transfer along the east side of the terminal. It was old but reliable. At least that was the official description. Daniel had learned long ago that reliable could become a dangerous word when people stopped asking why a machine had earned it. Ray Dalton stood near the equipment shed, smoking beside a yellow maintenance cart. Daniel walked over. Thought you quit. Ray looked at the cigarette. I quit buying them. That isn't the same thing. At my age, definitions get flexible. Ray Dalton was 62 and looked older in winter. 34 years at the terminal had turned his hands thick and scarred. He knew every crane loader belt and power unit on the property. If Daniel wanted the official maintenance history, he could open a database. If he wanted the truth, he usually asked Ray. Daniel gestured toward Crane 6. You notice vibration on the north side. Ray's eyes moved toward the crane. Sometimes. How long? Ray took another drag. Depends who's asking. I am. Ray looked at him. Long enough. Daniel waited. Ray flicked ash onto the wet concrete. You should check the connector assembly. Why? Ray shrugged. Because I said so. Daniel stared at him. Ray walked toward the shed. You're welcome. Daniel watched him leave. 10 minutes later, he was inside the maintenance office pulling the most recent inspection photographs. The connector assembly appeared in 6 images. Daniel enlarged the 3rd, then the 5th. His posture changed. There, a line near the edge of the plate, thin, almost nothing. He zoomed in. The crack pattern was wrong for ordinary surface wear. Daniel leaned closer. For a moment the office around him disappeared. He saw a drafting table. Laura bent over a photograph beneath a desk lamp, her pencil tapping against a crack in a steel connection. Look at where the stress wants to go. Daniel blinked. The memory vanished. He opened the maintenance history. Routine visual inspection completed. Temporary reinforcement installed. Load test deferred. Daniel frowned. He scrolled. 3 months earlier. Load test deferred, 6 months before that. Temporary reinforcement approved. He printed the records. The floor supervisor, Kevin Marsh, was checking manifests when Daniel found him. Who approved the last deferral on 6? Kevin barely looked up. Keller's office. Was engineering consulted? Should be in the record. It isn't. Kevin sighed. Daniel, if Keller signed it, somebody looked at it. That's not what I asked. Kevin finally met his eyes. What's bothering you? Daniel placed the photograph on the desk. This. Kevin squinted. I see a dirty piece of metal. Possibly fatigue. Possibly dirt. It needs testing. Kevin leaned back. Full shutdown. For inspection. Kevin rubbed his forehead. You know what Crane 6 is scheduled for this week? I know. Or vessel Friday morning? I know. Then you know Keller won't shut it down because of one photograph. Daniel picked up the paper. Then I'll ask him directly. Kevin laughed without humor. Good luck. Grant's office was 2 floors above the yard. Daniel knocked once. Grant looked up from his laptop. Mercer, I need 5 minutes. You have 3. Daniel entered and placed the maintenance record on the desk. Grant scanned the first page. Crane 6. Connector assembly. What about it? I want a full structural inspection. Grant looked up. Based on... Daniel showed him the photograph. Grant stared at it for several seconds, then pushed it back. Visual inspection passed. Visual inspection isn't enough. The crane has operated for months. That doesn't tell us what the plate looks like under load. Grant folded his hands. You're asking me to shut down the most productive crane in the terminal during a major shipping week. I'm asking you to inspect it. Same practical result. Daniel remained standing. Grant's eyes moved over him. I know you used to be an engineer. Daniel said nothing. Grant continued. Your old credentials are in the personnel file. I didn't realize you read it. I read everything. Daniel almost believed him. Grant tapped the photograph. But you aren't an engineer here. No. Your responsibility is yard safety and freight movement. Safety is exactly why I'm here. Grant's expression cooled. Be careful about confusing experience with authority. Daniel looked at the maintenance record, then back at Grant. Metal doesn't care what title is printed on my badge. For the first time, Grant's face changed, only slightly. You finished? Daniel picked up the documents. Not really. Then finish somewhere else. Daniel left. By noon, Claire had copies of the same records on her desk. She read them twice, then called Daniel. Conference room, 2 o'clock. Who else? Keller and Regional Engineering. Daniel paused. You moved fast. Was I supposed to move slowly? No. 2 o'clock. She ended the call. At 1:58, Daniel entered the conference room carrying photographs and maintenance records. Grant was already seated. Across from him sat Mark Ellis, a regional engineering specialist from Superior, Wisconsin, and a younger structural analyst named Rachel Kim. Claire stood beside the monitor. Grant glanced at Daniel. Apparently we're having a crisis. Claire ignored the comment. Daniel found irregularities in the Crane 6 maintenance history. Grant leaned back. He found a blurry line in a photograph. Daniel sat. Claire looked toward Mark. Let's decide which one. The images appeared on screen. Daniel walked them through the connector geometry. He explained where stress should distribute under normal load, where fatigue would likely appear, why the temporary reinforcement could conceal deeper cracking. Rachel leaned forward. Can you enlarge the lower left corner? Daniel did. She stared. Mark's expression became more serious. Grant noticed. That still doesn't prove anything. Daniel turned toward him. No. Grant smiled slightly. Daniel continued. That's why we inspect it. The smile disappeared. Mark rubbed his chin. When was the last load test? Daniel slid the record toward him. Mark read it. Deferred twice, Grant answered. Production requirements. Rachel looked up. Who signed the engineering approval? Silence. Daniel watched Grant. Grant looked toward Claire. I don't remember every maintenance form that crosses my desk. Claire's voice was calm. Then we'll find it. Grant shifted. We're turning a routine equipment issue into a board-level event because a yard supervisor has an old engineering background. Daniel felt the insult. He did not react. Claire did. He's not rewriting the inspection. Her voice remained quiet. He's pointing out that the inspection doesn't answer the question. Grant looked at her. Claire continued. And he's right. The room went still. Grant's jaw tightened. Mark looked again at the photograph. I recommend a teardown. Grant turned toward him. How long? At least 2 days. We have a vessel loading Friday. Mark shrugged. Then use another crane. That shifts the entire schedule. Claire closed the folder. Shift it. Grant stared at her. You want to lose a major departure window over a possibility? Claire met his eyes. I want to know whether people are working beneath a compromised structure. Grant pushed his chair back. This is exactly why operations shouldn't be managed from photographs. Daniel spoke quietly. Then come look at the crane. Grant turned. Daniel continued. Come stand under it. No one said anything. Grant's face reddened slightly. He gathered his papers. Schedule the inspection. Claire nodded. Good. Grant walked toward the door. His hand stopped on the handle. He looked back, not at Daniel first. At Claire, then Daniel. The glance lasted only a second, but Daniel understood it. The argument had stopped being only about steel. After Grant left, Mark gathered the photographs. You were right to flag it. Daniel looked toward the image on screen. I hope I'm wrong. Rachel frowned. Why? Daniel turned off the monitor. Because if I'm right, somebody should have caught it months ago. Later that afternoon, Claire walked the east loading lane alone. Crane 6 towered over the terminal. Daniel stood beneath it, speaking to 2 mechanics. He crouched beside a younger worker who was pointing at a cable guide. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. When the worker finished, Daniel explained something quietly and handed him the inspection light. The worker checked again, nodded, corrected the problem himself. Claire watched from a distance. She had seen Daniel manage people before, but after Friday night, small things felt different. She knew now why he never yelled, why he checked twice, why he left at 5:15, why every safety report contained more detail than necessary. She knew about Laura. Knowledge changed the shape of observation. You spend a lot of time down here. Claire turned. Grant stood beside her. His coat was buttoned to his throat. That's part of my job. Regional directors usually have offices. I use mine. Grant smiled faintly. People notice things. Claire looked at him. What things? He glanced toward Daniel, then back at her. Nothing important. Claire's face remained neutral. Grant slipped his hands into his pockets. I just think it's interesting. How much confidence you place in Mercer? Claire held his gaze. He's earned it. Grant nodded slowly. Of course. He walked away. Claire watched him for several seconds. Then she looked back toward Daniel. He was laughing at something one of the mechanics had said. For the first time since Friday, Claire allowed herself to watch. Only for a moment. Then Daniel looked up. Their eyes met across the yard. Neither smiled. Neither needed to. The lake wind moved between them, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of wet steel. Above Daniel's head, Crane 6 stood motionless against the gray Duluth sky. A maintenance tag fluttered from the access gate. Daniel reached up and caught it before the wind tore it loose. He looked at the connector assembly again, then at the inspection record in his hand. 2 signatures sat at the bottom of the page. One belonged to a technician, the other belonged to Grant Keller. Daniel folded the paper once and slipped it into his jacket. Across the yard, Claire was already walking back toward the operations building. Daniel watched her go. Then he turned toward the crane and climbed the first steel stair. Daniel climbed slowly. The steel stairs beneath his boots were slick with mist, and every few steps he stopped to look through the open frame of Crane 6 toward the lake. Duluth disappeared behind a wall of gray. The harbor horn sounded somewhere beyond the fog, low and distant. At the connector platform, Daniel crouched beside the access panel and ran one gloved hand over the steel plate. Cold metal, old paint, a hairline stain along the edge where water had worked into the seam. Nothing dramatic, nothing a casual glance would remember. Daniel leaned closer. The surface crack from the photograph was visible now. Barely. He took out his phone and photographed it from 3 angles. Then he pulled a small inspection light from his jacket and held it along the plate. The line darkened. Not dirt, not surface wear. A crack. He stared at it for several seconds. Laura would have called it quiet damage, the kind that waited, the kind that did not care whether a schedule was convenient. Daniel stood. Below him the yard looked small. Workers moved between trailers and loading lanes. Forklifts rolled through the fog. Someone shouted near the rail siding, everything normal. That was the part he hated. Danger almost never announced itself in a way people respected. Most of the time it looked ordinary right up until it did not. He descended and found Ray Dalton waiting near the bottom. Ray had one hand in his coat pocket and the other wrapped around a paper cup. "You went up." Daniel looked at him. "I did. What'd you see?" A crack. Ray's face did not change. Daniel noticed that. "You already knew." Ray took a drink. "I knew something wasn't right. That's not the same answer." Ray looked toward the operations building. "No." Daniel stepped closer. "How long?" Ray's jaw moved. He seemed to consider whether silence was still useful. Long enough to hate the question. Daniel waited. Ray looked at the crane again. "You ever work somewhere so long you stop remembering which bad decisions belong to which year?" Daniel did not answer. Ray continued. "People think corruption looks like envelopes full of cash. Most of the time it looks like a form somebody doesn't want to argue about." "Grant," Ray's eyes shifted back to him. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Ray gave a tired smile. "Careful, Mercer." "Why?" "Because once you start pulling on certain threads, you don't get to decide what comes loose." Daniel looked up at the crane. "I think we're past that." Ray studied him. Then he turned away. "Maybe." Daniel watched him disappear into the maintenance shed. The teardown was scheduled for Wednesday morning. By Tuesday night, that plan no longer felt fast enough. Daniel was home at the kitchen table helping Sophie with fractions when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Sophie looked up from her worksheet. "Work." "Probably." "You make the face." "What face?" "The one where you pretend you are not thinking about work while thinking about work." Daniel picked up the phone. A text. "You didn't hear it from me. Crane 6 overload alarm went off around 12:40 last night. Lasted maybe 10 seconds. Daniel read the message twice. Sophie watched him. "Bad." "I don't know." "That means yes." Daniel stood. "Finish number 7. You always say finish the whole page. Tonight you get lucky." He walked into the hallway and called the number. A man answered on the 4th ring. "Yeah." "Who is this?" "Mike. Night loading." Daniel knew him. "Tell me exactly what you heard." "Control alarm. High load warning, I think. Wind was loud." "Who was running the crane?" "No load at the time. It was parked." Daniel frowned. "How long?" 10 seconds. Maybe 11. "Did you log it?" Silence. "Mike." "No." "Why not?" It cleared. "That's not why." Another silence. Finally Mike said, "Keller was still here." Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. "Grant." "Yeah." "At 12:40 in the morning." His car was outside. Daniel looked toward the living room. Sophie was pretending not to listen. "Did he say anything to you?" "No." "Did anyone check the panel?" "Ray did." "What did he find?" "Don't know." Daniel ended the call and immediately logged into the maintenance system from his laptop. He pulled the alert history. Nothing. He checked the last 24 hours. Nothing. He widened the search. No overload alarm, no warning, no recorded event at 12:40. Daniel sat back. Electronic systems failed. Logs corrupted. Sensors misread. He knew that. He also knew coincidence could become a convenient word when people were frightened of the alternative. Sophie appeared beside him. "You forgot number 7. Daniel looked at her. She was holding the worksheet. For a moment he saw Laura standing in their old kitchen with a roll of drawings beneath one arm, telling him she needed to go back to the office because one calculation did not make sense. He had told her not to worry. It had been late. The project team would handle it in the morning. Laura had looked at him and said something Daniel remembered more clearly now than he wanted to. "If something feels wrong, I want to know why before I sleep." Daniel closed the laptop. "Get your coat." Sophie frowned. "Why? You're staying with Aaron tonight." "Did I do something?" "No." "Then why?" "Because I need to go back to work." Sophie studied his face. "Is it the crane?" Daniel did not ask how she knew. "Yeah." She nodded. No argument. That frightened him more than if she had complained. 20 minutes later, Daniel left Sophie at Aaron's house. Aaron stood in the doorway wearing slippers and a sweatshirt. "You look terrible." "Thanks." "What happened?" "Equipment issue." At 8:30, Daniel looked toward Sophie, who was already walking toward the living room. Aaron lowered her voice. "Is Claire involved?" Daniel looked at her. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you made the same face when you said her name Saturday morning." "I didn't say her name Saturday morning. You didn't have to." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Aaron." "Fine." She stepped aside so Sophie could wave from the hallway. "Go do whatever responsible thing is making you impossible." Daniel turned toward his truck. Behind him, Aaron called softly. "Daniel." He looked back. "Be careful." He nodded, then drove toward the terminal. The yard at night felt like a different place. Fewer voices, more shadows. Floodlights turned the steel structures white against the darkness. Steam drifted from vents. The lake wind cut between warehouses with enough force to shake loose metal siding. Daniel found Ray in the maintenance shed. The older man was sitting on a workbench with his coat still on. He did not seem surprised to see him. "You heard about the alarm." Daniel shut the door. "Mike called me." Ray looked down. "What did you find?" "Nothing in the system." "That's because there's nothing there now." Daniel stared at him. "Now?" Ray looked toward the small window in the shed. "I checked it last night. And alarm was real. Why didn't you log it?" Ray's face hardened. "I did." Daniel said nothing. Ray reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a small black notebook. The cover was worn soft at the corners. He held it for several seconds without giving it to Daniel. "I started writing things down 2 years ago." Daniel looked at the notebook. "Why?" "Because I got tired of trying to remember which things I was supposed to pretend never happened." He handed it over. Daniel opened to the first page. Dates, equipment numbers, initials. Short notes written in cramped handwriting, visual only. No load test performed. Keller requested sign-off. Crack observed. Temporary patch approved. Alarm reset manually. Full maintenance delayed. Daniel turned the page. Then another. Then another. Crane 6 appeared repeatedly. So did other machines. Grant's initials appeared in the margins. Daniel looked up. "What is this?" Ray rubbed both hands over his face. "The truth as close as I could keep it." "You signed some of these forms." Ray nodded. 3. "Without doing the work." "Not all of it." Daniel's voice sharpened. "That isn't an answer." "I know." Ray stood. "You think I don't know?" He moved toward the workbench. "I have 5 months until retirement. 34 years in this place. My wife has medical bills that make my pension look small already." Daniel watched him. Ray's voice lowered. "Grant never came out and said, 'Sign this or lose your job.' Men like him don't have to." He picked up a wrench and set it down again. "He says production is critical, says the inspection can wait until next quarter, says the last technician already looked at it, says legal approved the temporary fix." Ray looked at Daniel. "Then he leaves the form on your desk." "Why keep the notebook?" "Because I knew one day somebody might need to know what really happened." "Why not report it?" Ray laughed once. There was no humor in it. "Because I was scared." Daniel said nothing. Ray looked away. "Not proud of it." Daniel turned another page. "I kept telling myself I'd say something after retirement, when they couldn't touch my pension, when my wife was covered, when it was somebody else's problem." He swallowed. "Then I watched you staring at that crane like it was talking to you." Daniel closed the notebook. "Why give this to me now?" Ray met his eyes. "Because you're the first person in years who looked twice." The words settled heavily between them. Daniel looked down at the notebook again. For a moment he could hear Laura. Not clearly. Not a memory of any one conversation. More like the feeling of her voice. The way she never let uncertainty become an excuse for silence. Daniel slipped the notebook inside his jacket. "Will you testify to this?" Ray went still. "If it comes to that—" Daniel nodded. Ray's eyes closed briefly, then opened. "Yeah." Daniel believed him. Claire was still awake when Daniel called. Her voice was quiet. "Daniel, I need to show you something." A pause. "Now?" "Yes." She heard something in his tone. "Where are you?" "Leaving the terminal." "Come here." He knew her address from an employee emergency contact file. He hated that he knew that. 10 minutes later, he was driving through freezing rain toward the hillside neighborhood above downtown. Claire opened the door before he reached the porch. She wore black sweatpants and a faded University of Minnesota sweatshirt. Her hair was loose. No makeup, no coat. Daniel had never seen her look less like his boss. That thought disappeared the moment he handed her Ray's notebook. She read the first page standing in the doorway, then stepped aside. "Come in." Her apartment was warmer than Daniel expected. Quiet. Too neat. A single lamp glowed beside the couch. 3 sealed moving boxes sat against the wall near the hallway. Daniel noticed them. Claire noticed him noticing. I didn't say anything." "You were going to." "I wasn't. You have the face." Daniel almost smiled. Then Claire opened the notebook again. The smile disappeared. They moved to the dining table. Within 20 minutes, the surface was covered with printed logs, inspection records, laptop screens, and Daniel's photographs from Crane 6. Claire cross-checked dates. Daniel checked signatures. Ray's notes matched maintenance deferrals too closely to dismiss. Sometimes the notebook recorded inspections that had never appeared in the official system. Other times the official report described work Ray said had not been completed. Claire stared at one entry. March 17th. Daniel searched the database. Crane 6 reinforcement. Ray says the plate was only visually checked. Daniel found the report. Official record says full inspection completed. Claire looked at the signature. Keller. Daniel leaned back. The room went quiet. Rain tapped against the windows. Claire stood and went to the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Sure." She poured 2 cups. Daniel watched her move. No assistants, no conference table, no voices outside the door. Just Claire in an old sweatshirt at 1 in the morning carrying coffee toward a table full of evidence that could destroy somebody's career. She sat. "Tell me about the alarm." Daniel did. Claire pulled up the access history. Her brow tightened. "Keller has remote administrative privileges. Can he erase alerts? Not officially. That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "No." Then she added, "Not officially." Daniel stared at the records. Claire followed his gaze. "You think he cleared it? I think somebody did. That's different." "Yes." She appreciated that he made the distinction. They kept working. At 1:37, Daniel reached for one of the structural photographs. His hand stopped. Claire noticed. "Daniel!" He did not answer. The crack in the connector plate sat beneath the desk lamp. The angle, the staining, the shape. It was not the same as Laura's project. But it was close enough. His breathing changed. Claire did not touch him. "Same kind of failure." Daniel nodded. "Close." He stared at the photograph. Laura found cracking around a support connection. Claire waited. People kept asking whether it was serious enough to stop work. Daniel's jaw tightened. That question followed her for 2 days. He looked toward the window. I hated that question. Because she was right. Because everybody asking already knew the answer they wanted. Claire said nothing. Daniel continued. They wanted her to tell them it could wait. His voice was quieter. She wouldn't. Claire looked down at the photograph. "And you?" Daniel's face hardened. I told myself this wasn't my life anymore. Daniel, I took this job because I didn't want this responsibility. Claire leaned forward. You did not create that crack. No. You didn't falsify the inspection. No. Then don't put all of this on your shoulders because it looks familiar. Daniel looked at her. You don't understand. Then tell me. He sat back. For several seconds, only the rain filled the room. After Laura died, I spent months thinking about every conversation we had that week. Claire's eyes stayed on him. I remembered telling her to come home. His voice caught. She was still at the office the night before the collapse. I told her the company had other engineers. I told her she had done her part. Claire remained still. Daniel stared at the coffee. Walk away while she still thought people were in danger. He swallowed. I spent 3 years walking away. Claire's face softened. From engineering. From the part of me that knew what she meant. Daniel looked at the notebook. Ray was scared, I understand that. He laughed quietly, bitterly. That's the problem. I understand it too well. Claire's voice was low. You're here now. Daniel looked up. She continued. At 1:40 in the morning, at my table, with evidence in your jacket. Daniel held her gaze. Claire pushed the photograph toward him. That doesn't look like walking away. His shoulders dropped slightly. Not relief. Something closer to acceptance. Daniel looked at the crack again. I need to know. Claire nodded. So do I. They returned to the records. By 2:05, they had enough to act. Not enough to prove every suspicion. Enough to shut down Crane 6. Claire closed Ray's notebook. I'm taking it offline. Daniel looked at her. Immediately. First shift. Grant will fight it. He can fight me. Daniel leaned back. The vessel schedule is Friday. I know. Quarter closes Friday. I know. Board review is next week. Claire stared at him. Do you think I forgot how calendars work? Daniel almost smiled. Then his expression turned serious. He'll use the dinner. Claire's hand stopped on the notebook. We can't pretend that part doesn't exist. I know. If this turns into a formal investigation, he'll say you're protecting me. Claire looked toward the dark kitchen. Then she reached for her phone. Daniel frowned. What are you doing? Calling legal. At 2 in the morning. You're the one who showed up at my house at midnight. Fair. Claire found a number and walked toward the living room. Daniel heard only fragments. Potential conflict. Blind date. No prior disclosure because no ongoing relationship. Structural safety investigation. Independent review. Recusal if necessary. Daniel looked at the boxes against the wall. For the first time, he understood something about Claire that had nothing to do with attraction. She lived like someone who never expected to stay anywhere long enough to become comfortable. Not because she was restless, because comfort looked dangerous to her too. Claire returned several minutes later. They'll document the disclosure. Daniel nodded. And they want independent engineering to verify everything before any disciplinary action. Good. They also want someone outside my reporting structure involved in the investigation. Also good. Claire watched him. You sound relieved. I am. Why, because if this gets ugly, I don't want anyone saying you protected me. Her expression changed. You think that's what I'm worried about? Partly. No. Daniel waited. Claire looked toward the table. I'm worried that somebody knew enough to hide this. She touched the notebook. And I'm worried that 30 people work under that crane every day. Daniel nodded. Claire's eyes returned to him. And yes, I'm worried about you. The words sat between them. Neither moved. Claire took a breath. Professionally. Daniel's mouth almost curved. Of course. She gave him a look. Don't. I didn't say anything. You had the face. That time they both smiled, only for a second. Then the weight of the table returned. At 2:30, Daniel stood near the door. Claire handed him Ray's notebook. Keep it with you. Why me? Because Ray gave it to you. Daniel slipped it into his coat. Claire opened the door. Cold air moved inside. Get some sleep. Daniel stepped onto the porch. So should you. That's unlikely. He looked back at her. Claire, She waited. Thank you. For what? Daniel thought about it. For not telling me I'm overreacting. Her expression softened. You've spent enough time around people who did that. Daniel nodded, then walked to his truck. The rain had turned to wet snow. At home, the house was empty without Sophie. Daniel stood in the kitchen and looked at the scratched table where they ate dinner every night. He sat down. For years, Laura's memory had lived mostly in objects. A coffee mug, a raincoat in the basement closet, a photograph in the hallway, a voice he could no longer hear perfectly. Tonight she felt closer. Not painfully. Not exactly. More like Daniel had finally stepped back into a room he had locked after she died. He rested both hands on the table. I heard you, he said softly. The house remained quiet. Daniel went upstairs. At 5:10 the alarm sounded. He had not slept. By 6:20 Claire was already in the regional office. She signed the shutdown order. Crane 6, immediate suspension of operation. Full structural inspection required. She sent copies to Terminal Management Engineering, Legal Maintenance, and Dispatch. Then she called the yard. No answer. She called again. Across the terminal, Grant Keller was already there. He had arrived before dawn. He stood in the dispatch office, looking at the same shutdown notice on a supervisor's screen. Outside, a bulk vessel was approaching the harbor. Its loading slot had been reserved for weeks. If the shipment missed departure, the quarterly throughput number would fall below the target Grant had promised the board. The floor supervisor looked at him. Claire says Crane 6 is down. Grant stared through the window. The crane stood silent over the loading lane. Inspection starts at 8. That's what the order says. Grant checked his watch. 6:42. The vessel would be ready before 7:30. One load, maybe two. Enough to keep the schedule. He looked at the supervisor. Start the crane. The man hesitated. Grant, I'm authorizing it. There's a shutdown order. Pending inspection. It says immediate. Grant's voice hardened. I can read. The supervisor said nothing. Grant continued. We have less than an hour. Run the first transfer and park it. What if Bennett calls? She can call me. The supervisor looked toward Crane 6. Grant leaned closer. Do you want to explain to the board why this terminal missed target because somebody panicked over a photograph? The supervisor looked away. Grant straightened. Start it. At 6:55, Daniel turned into the employee lot. He had a coffee in one hand and Ray's notebook inside his jacket. The fog had lifted. The sky was pale. Cold sunlight reflected off the harbor. Daniel stepped from his truck. A diesel engine started somewhere beyond the warehouse. Then another sound reached him. Deep, mechanical, familiar. Daniel turned. Crane 6 was moving. For a moment he simply stared. Then his coffee slipped from his hand and struck the pavement. He began walking quickly, then faster. A dock worker passed him. Daniel grabbed his sleeve. Why is 6 running? The man pointed toward dispatch. Keller cleared it. Daniel looked up. The crane boom rotated over the loading lane. A suspended cargo frame rose slowly from the ground. His stomach tightened. Stop it! The worker frowned. What? Daniel was already running. Stop the crane! Heads turned across the yard. Daniel reached for his radio. Control shut down 6 immediately. Static. Then a voice. Repeat. Shut down Crane 6 now. The cargo continued rising. Daniel looked at the connector assembly. Even from the ground, something felt wrong. The boom shuddered once, small, almost invisible. Daniel stopped. He heard it. A metallic pop. Sharp, dry. The sound of stored force finding somewhere else to go. Every muscle in his body went cold. Clear the lane. The nearest worker stared at him. Daniel's voice changed. Not louder at first. Flatter, exact. Everyone clear the lane now. One man began moving. Another looked up. Daniel saw the connector plate flex. Then he heard the second crack, this one louder. Daniel drew one breath. Everybody out! The yard erupted into motion. Daniel ran toward Crane 6 with his radio pressed against his mouth. Clear the swing zone. Move. Move now. Workers scattered across the loading lane. One forklift stopped so suddenly its tires squealed against the concrete. A steel frame hung beneath the crane, swaying several feet above the ground. The boom shuddered again. Daniel saw the connector plate flex. That should not happen. Not like that. Kill power to 6. The radio cracked. Control is trying. Do not try. Shut it down. Daniel looked toward the operator cab. A man inside was waving through the glass. The crane had stopped lifting, but the load was still suspended. The entire structure gave a long metallic groan. Daniel knew that sound. Not from this yard, from years of engineering reports, from failure videos, from photographs taken after people were already dead. His body understood before his mind finished naming it. Progressive connection failure. Someone shouted behind him. "Mercer, get back!" Daniel did not move. He scanned the lane. 4 workers were already clear. 2 more were running toward the warehouse. Then he saw Tyler Shaw, 23 years old, 6 months on the job, standing near a pallet barrier with his face turned upward, frozen. Daniel shouted, "Tyler!" No response. The boom dropped several inches. Tyler flinched but still did not move. Daniel ran toward him. A supervisor screamed his name. Daniel ignored it. The steel frame overhead swung left, then right. Tyler finally looked at Daniel. "Move." Tyler stumbled backward. Daniel reached him, grabbed the front of his safety vest and pulled. The connector gave. The sound was enormous. Not an explosion, something worse. The tearing scream of steel surrendering under force. Daniel threw Tyler behind a concrete barrier and dropped with him. Above them, Crane 6 lurched. The boom fell. 3 feet, 4, 5. The suspended cargo frame swung outward like a pendulum. It passed through the space Tyler had occupied less than 2 seconds earlier. The emergency brake caught. The entire crane shook. Metal rattled across the loading lane. Dust drifted down from the connector assembly in a pale cloud. For one strange second, nobody made a sound. Then the yard returned all at once. Radios, shouting, boots. An alarm began pulsing from the control cabinet. Tyler was breathing hard beside Daniel. "You hit..." Tyler shook his head. Daniel grabbed his shoulders. "Look at me." Tyler did. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Anything feel wrong?" "No." Daniel released him. "Stay behind the barrier." Daniel stood. His knees almost failed. He locked them. Not now. He looked up at Crane 6. The boom was hanging at an angle. The main connector had partially separated. The emergency brake held the remaining load. For the moment. Daniel raised the radio. "Nobody approaches the crane." A voice answered. "Power is off." "Confirm mechanical isolation." "Working on it." "Get the secondary feed disconnected. Lock the east lane. Nobody crosses the painted boundary." The floor supervisor reached him. "Daniel." "Where's the operator?" "Still in the cab." Daniel looked up. The cab sat above the damaged connection, not directly over the failure. Too close. "Can he exit?" "Access ladder runs through the east side." Daniel studied the structure. The ladder was intact, but the boom angle had shifted. The load remained unstable. He keyed the radio. "Cab operator, this is Mercer. Do you copy static?" Then a shaky voice. "Yeah." "Stay seated." "I can climb down." "No." A pause. "Daniel." "Stay where you are until I tell you." The operator breathed into the radio. Daniel looked toward the maintenance crew approaching from the warehouse. Ray. Ray was already moving toward him. His face had gone pale. Daniel pointed toward the base. "Confirm brake engagement and secondary support." Ray nodded. "You coming?" "No, you know the system better." Ray hesitated. Daniel met his eyes. "Go." Ray ran. The cold air burned Daniel's lungs. He forced himself to keep looking at the crane. Not at the memory trying to replace it. A warehouse corridor, a hospital, Laura's coat. Not now. He heard tires behind him. Claire's SUV stopped near the operations building. She was out before the engine had fully died. Her coat was open, hair loose from the wind. She ran across the yard. Daniel saw her approaching and lifted one hand. "Stop there." Claire stopped just outside the restricted area. "What happened?" "Primary connector failure. Emergency brake caught the boom." "Anyone hurt?" "No." The answer left him harder than expected. Claire looked at Tyler sitting behind the barrier, then at the operator cab. Everyone accounted for. One operator still inside. Claire's face tightened. "What do you need?" Daniel looked toward Ray. "Isolation confirmation." As if on cue, Ray's voice came through the radio. "Primary power isolated, secondary feed isolated, brake pressure stable." Daniel answered. "Any visible movement?" "None. Support pin." Still seated. Daniel looked toward the access ladder. He calculated distance, angle, remaining load, not with paper, not with software. His mind was doing it automatically. He hated how natural it felt. "Operator can exit," Ray answered. "Agreed." Daniel raised the radio. "Cab operator, start down. Slow, 3 points of contact. Do not touch the east rail near the connector platform." "Copy." Claire watched Daniel. His voice had changed. She had heard him calm before. This was different. Every word had a purpose. Every movement around him seemed to pass through a structure only he could see. Workers listened. Supervisors moved when he told them to move. Ray asked before changing anything. Daniel was not the man trying to avoid engineering. Not here. Not now. The operator reached the ground 4 minutes later. Applause almost started from somewhere near the warehouse. Daniel killed it with one look. "Medical check anyway." The operator nodded. Daniel turned toward the floor supervisor. "Shut down the entire east lane until engineering clears every structural connection tied to the same maintenance cycle." The supervisor stared. "All of it. All of it." Grant's voice came from behind them. "That is not your call." Daniel turned. Grant walked quickly across the yard coat buttoned high phone still in one hand. He looked at the damaged crane. His face changed only for an instant. Then the executive returned. "Mechanical failure," Grant said. Daniel stared at him. Grant continued. "Everyone back from the structure. We'll file the incident, bring in engineering, and determine cause." Daniel took one step toward him. "It's not a mechanical failure." Grant looked at him. Daniel's hands were shaking now. His voice was not. "It's a deferred inspection. It's a connector we flagged. It's a shutdown order you overrode this morning." Grant's eyes sharpened. "Watch yourself." Claire stepped closer. "Did you authorize operation after my order?" Grant looked at her. "One controlled transfer." Claire did not blink. "You put Crane 6 into service after an immediate shutdown." "The vessel was already positioned. I don't care." Grant lowered his voice. "You will when the board sees the quarterly number." Claire's face went still. Daniel looked between them. Grant pointed toward the crane. "This is equipment failure. It happens." Daniel laughed once. The sound was empty. "No." Grant turned. Daniel walked toward the edge of the restricted line and pointed upward. "See the plate?" Grant did not answer. "That connector did exactly what I told you it was doing. The crack propagated under load. Your temporary reinforcement moved stress into the remaining section." Grant's jaw tightened. You are not currently licensed to issue a structural conclusion." Daniel looked at him. "I don't need a license to recognize a fracture after it tears open in front of me." "Then let the engineers determine it." "They will." Daniel stepped closer. "And they're going to ask why the load test was deferred twice." Grant's eyes flicked toward Claire. Daniel saw it. So did Claire. She said quietly, "Ray's notebook is already preserved." Grant's face changed. Not much. Enough. "What notebook?" Claire held his gaze. "The one you should be worried about." For the first time since Daniel had known Grant, the man had no immediate response. The silence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt much longer. Claire turned to the floor supervisor. "Lock the east lane. Nobody touches the crane until the independent team arrives." Grant took a step forward. "Claire," she turned, "do not give another operational instruction at this terminal." His face reddened. "You do not have authority to suspend me. I have authority over this site." "That is not the same thing." "Today it is." Grant looked around. Workers were watching, so were supervisors. Daniel could see Grant realizing the same thing. Any argument here became public. Grant lowered his voice. "You are making a mistake." Claire answered just as quietly, "No, I am documenting yours." Grant walked away. Nobody followed him. Daniel watched until Grant disappeared into the operations building. Then the adrenaline began leaving his body. Not gradually, all at once. His hands shook harder. The yard tilted slightly. He sat down on the nearest concrete barrier. Claire noticed. She walked toward him. "Daniel, I'm fine." "No, you're not." "I'm not hurt." "I didn't ask if you were hurt." Daniel looked down at his hands. They would not stop. He curled them into fists. That made it worse. Claire crouched several feet in front of him. She did not touch him. "You got everyone out?" Daniel nodded. "Tyler is fine." Another nod. "The operator is down." "I know." Claire waited. Daniel stared at the concrete. "I heard it." "The connector." He nodded. His jaw tightened. "Same sound." Daniel closed his eyes. "Not exactly." Claire understood anyway. He opened them. "The first time I didn't know until the phone rang." His voice was barely above the wind. "I wasn't there." Claire remained silent. "I spent 3 years imagining that if I had been there, maybe I would have seen what Laura saw. Maybe I would have pushed harder. Maybe I could have gotten her out. Daniel." "I know." He looked up. "I know that's not rational." Claire's eyes softened. He looked back toward the crane. "But this time I was there." A long pause. This time they went home. Claire sat beside him. Their shoulders nearly touched. "Yes." Daniel inhaled slowly. The shaking began to ease. Claire looked toward Tyler, who was now being checked by a medic near the warehouse door. "He would have been under that load." Daniel nodded. "You pulled him out." "I didn't think. Maybe that's why you could." Daniel looked at her. Claire stopped herself. No explanations, no speeches. She simply sat beside him. After a moment, their shoulders touched. Daniel did not move away. By 9 that morning, the terminal looked less like a freight yard and more like an investigation scene. Independent structural engineers arrived from Minneapolis. Corporate safety sent 2 people. Legal called 3 times. Photographs were taken from every angle. The damaged connector was secured before anyone approached the upper platform. Ray gave his first formal statement in 34 years at the company. Daniel sat in the operations office with a paper cup of water he did not drink. A corporate safety investigator named Helen Brooks sat across from him. "Start with when you first noticed the issue." Daniel told her. The photographs, the deferrals, the meeting, the alarm, Ray's notebook, the shutdown order, Grant's authorization. Helen wrote almost nothing. She listened. When Daniel finished, she asked, "You were previously a structural engineer?" "Yes." "Current license?" "No." "Expired?" "Inactive." "How long?" 3 years. Helen nodded. "Did that affect your decision to order evacuation?" Daniel looked at her. "No." "Why not?" "Because evacuation doesn't require a professional seal." She almost smiled. "Fair." She leaned back. "Would you be willing to prepare a technical narrative for the independent team?" Daniel hesitated. The question should have been simple. It was not. For 3 years he had avoided language like technical narrative, avoided calculations, avoided responsibility attached to expertise. Helen waited. Daniel looked through the office window. Claire stood outside speaking to legal counsel. Ray was beside a maintenance truck. Tyler was calling someone on his phone, probably his mother. Daniel looked back at Helen. "Yes." His voice was quiet. "I'll do it." He spent the afternoon writing. At first every sentence felt foreign. Then muscle memory returned. Connection geometry, visual evidence, load path, stress concentration, progressive fracture. He reviewed photographs, marked dates, separated observation from assumption. Not once did he write Grant's name in a place where evidence did not support it. Claire read the final report after Daniel finished. She sat across from him in the small conference room. "You sound like an engineer." Daniel looked tired. "I was one." Claire placed the pages down. "You still are." He looked away. "Let's not get ambitious." She did not push. At 6:15, the independent team confirmed the obvious. The primary connector had suffered advanced fatigue cracking. The damage predated the morning operation. The temporary repair had been inadequate. A full load test likely would have exposed the danger months earlier. Daniel read the preliminary finding once. Then again, his hand stayed steady. Claire watched him from the doorway. "You were right." Daniel looked at the report. "I didn't want to be, I know." The emergency board session was scheduled for Thursday morning, 2 days after the failure. Daniel spent Wednesday at home with Sophie. He had not planned to. Claire ordered him off-site. When he protested, she said, "That is an instruction from your regional director." Daniel replied, "You seem to enjoy saying that now." Claire almost smiled. Go home. Sophie was waiting at the kitchen table when he walked in. She had heard a simplified version from Aaron. No injuries, crane problem, Dad helped. Children were rarely satisfied with simplified versions. Did you almost die? Daniel froze halfway through taking off his coat. No. Aaron said something broke. Something did. Were you close? Daniel sat across from her. Closer than I wanted to be. Sophie stared at him. Did you save somebody? Daniel hated the word. No, she frowned. Aaron said you pulled a guy away. I helped him move. That sounds like saving. Daniel rubbed his hands together. Sophie. She looked at him. He took a breath. People did what they were trained to do. The brakes worked. Ray isolated the equipment. Everybody helped. Sophie listened, then said, You always do that. Do what? Make yourself smaller when people say something good. Daniel went still. She returned to coloring. He stared at her. You've been spending too much time with Aaron. She says the same thing. Of course she does. Sophie colored for several seconds. Then she looked up again. Was Mom's accident like that? Daniel did not answer immediately. Sophie rarely asked directly. Maybe she had been waiting until she knew he could answer. In some ways. Did something break? Yes. Did people know? Daniel swallowed. Your mom thought there was a problem. And nobody listened. Not soon enough? Sophie looked down. Daniel continued. She tried very hard to make them listen. Sophie traced one finger along the edge of her drawing. Was she scared? Daniel felt the question somewhere deep. Probably. But she did it anyway. Yeah. Sophie nodded. Then she pushed the drawing toward him. It was another ship. This one had 2 sails instead of 3. Daniel looked at it. What happened to the 3rd sail? I decided you were right. He raised an eyebrow. Write down the date. Sophie smiled. The boardroom Thursday morning was 40 miles away at North Shore Freight's regional headquarters. Glass walls, long walnut table, lake visible beyond the windows. Daniel had been inside once before for a safety recognition meeting. He had hated the room then. He hated it more now. Claire sat near the center. Daniel sat 2 seats away at the request of legal counsel. Grant sat across from them. He looked rested. That irritated Daniel. Ray sat near the end with his hands folded tightly in front of him. Helen Brooks had the investigation files. 2 independent engineers joined by video. The board chair, Eleanor Price, opened the meeting at 9:03. No speeches, no speculation. We are here to determine what happened and what immediate action is required. She looked toward Helen. Proceed. Helen did. The evidence was presented in sequence. Maintenance history, deferred load tests, photographs, alarm records, Ray's notebook, the morning authorization, structural findings. Grant listened without expression. When Helen finished, Eleanor turned to him. Mr. Keller. Grant folded his hands. I think everyone in this room agrees the failure was serious. Daniel watched him. Grant continued. What I dispute is the narrative being built around ordinary operational decisions. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Grant looked toward the screen. Equipment is maintained according to risk, cost, and availability. Temporary repairs are standard in freight operations. One engineer on screen replied, not when fatigue cracking is suspected. Grant nodded, which was not confirmed at the time. Daniel leaned back. Grant looked toward Ray. As for Mr. Dalton's notebook, we are relying on private handwritten notes created outside any formal reporting system by an employee who admits signing inaccurate records himself. Ray's face reddened. Eleanor lifted one hand before he could speak. Grant continued. That affects credibility. Ray looked down. Daniel felt anger rise. He forced it away. Grant turned toward Daniel. And Mr. Mercer's conclusions come from a former engineer whose license has not been active in years. Daniel held his gaze. Grant's voice remained controlled. An employee who has publicly disagreed with me about operations more than once. Claire said his technical findings were independently verified. Grant looked at her. I am aware. Then why are we discussing his license? Because process matters. Claire's expression went cold. So does steel. Eleanor looked toward Grant. Did you authorize Crane 6 after the shutdown order? Grant paused. I authorized one limited operation before the inspection window. Yes or no? Yes. Did you know the order said immediate suspension? Grant glanced toward Claire. I believe the response was disproportionate to the available evidence. Eleanor looked at Helen. Timestamp. Helen opened a file. Authorization at 6:48. Equipment start at 6:53. Failure at 7:11. Eleanor looked back at Grant. 23 minutes. Grant said nothing. The room settled. Daniel could feel the argument shifting. Grant felt it too. He leaned back. Then I think the board should discuss another issue. Claire's eyes moved to him. Daniel knew immediately. Grant looked directly at Eleanor. The objectivity of this investigation. Eleanor frowned. Explain. Grant turned toward Claire. Regional Director Bennett has a personal relationship with Daniel Mercer. Silence. Daniel felt Ray look toward him. Grant continued. They were seen together at Harbor House last Friday evening. Claire did not move. Grant reached into his folder. He placed a printed photograph on the table. Daniel recognized the restaurant entrance. Claire, beside her car. Daniel standing several feet away. Someone had taken it from across the street. His stomach tightened. Grant looked around the table. Mr. Mercer raises a technical concern. Miss Bennett immediately supports him. She initiates an investigation. She removes equipment from service. She challenges my authority. Claire spoke. Are you finished? Grant smiled faintly. I think the board deserves to know whether this was entirely professional. Claire looked toward Eleanor. May I respond? Please. Claire placed both hands flat on the table. Yes, I had dinner with Daniel Mercer last Friday. Grant's smile grew. Claire continued. It was a blind date arranged by my sister. The smile stopped. Neither Daniel nor I knew who we were meeting until we arrived. She looked toward legal counsel. The potential conflict was disclosed Tuesday at 2:17 in the morning before formal disciplinary review began. Legal counsel nodded. Confirmed. Claire continued. I requested independent engineering verification and external investigation specifically because Daniel reports within my regional structure. Grant shifted. Claire opened another folder. The fatigue findings were verified by engineers who have never met Daniel. She placed the report in front of Eleanor. The altered maintenance records predate our dinner. Another document. Ray Dalton began keeping independent notes almost 2 years ago. Another. The missing alert was generated before I knew the notebook existed. Another. And this is your authorization to operate Crane 6 after my shutdown order. She slid the paper across the table. Grant stared at it. Claire's voice remained calm. If you want to discuss my personal life, we can. Daniel watched her. No anger. That made it sharper. But first explain why 30 people were working under a crane you authorized after you were told it might be structurally unsafe. Grant's jaw tightened. I acted on the information I had. Daniel spoke for the first time. No. Everyone looked at him. Grant's face hardened. Daniel continued. You acted on the number you wanted. Eleanor turned slightly. Mr. Mercer. Daniel looked at her. I apologize. He did not sound sorry. Grant leaned forward. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Personal hostility. Daniel met his eyes. You told me I was confusing experience with authority. Grant said nothing. Daniel continued. You were right about one thing. I didn't have authority. He looked toward the authorization record. You did. The room went quiet. Eleanor looked at Grant. Please step outside. Grant stared at her. For what purpose? So the board can discuss immediate personnel action. His face changed. You're suspending me over one equipment failure. Eleanor's voice remained flat. We are discussing 2 years of records and a direct override of a safety order. Grant looked toward Claire, then Daniel. For a moment, anger stripped away the polished executive expression. You think this makes you untouchable? Claire did not respond. Grant stood. He gathered none of his papers. He walked out. The door closed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Ray exhaled. It sounded like he had been holding his breath for 2 years. The board deliberated for less than 10 minutes. Grant Keller was suspended from all operational authority pending full investigation. His system access was revoked before he left the building. Corporate audit teams were assigned to every terminal where he had approved maintenance decisions. Ray was granted whistleblower protection after legal confirmed his notebook had triggered evidence preservation before the crane failure. Daniel sat through all of it feeling strangely detached. He had expected relief. Instead, he felt tired. Eleanor closed the personnel discussion. Then she looked at Daniel. "Mr. Mercer, stay." Daniel glanced toward Claire. Her expression gave him nothing. He remained seated. Several board members shifted papers. Eleanor folded her hands. "You've been with North Shore Freight 3 years?" "Yes." "Prior to that, structural engineering?" "Yes." "Your license is inactive?" "Correct." "Could it be restored?" Daniel hesitated. "With continuing education and state requirements, yes." Eleanor nodded. "We have a problem that extends beyond Crane 6. Daniel listened. "The preliminary audit suggests our regional structural oversight is fragmented. Equipment decisions are spread across operations maintenance and outside contractors." She slid a document toward him. "The board authorized creation of a regional structural safety manager position this morning." Daniel looked at the page. The title seemed almost unreal. Eleanor continued. "Independent reporting line to corporate safety. Authority to halt equipment over structural concerns. Responsibility for crane and frame review across the district." Daniel did not touch the document. Claire watched him. Eleanor said, "We would like you to take it." Daniel looked up. No one moved. His first instinct was immediate. No. The word formed before he could examine it. He saw Laura's drafting table, the hospital chair, years of unopened engineering books in his basement. Then he saw Tyler beneath the crane, the connector opening, workers running home alive. Daniel looked at Claire. She did not smile, did not nod, did not rescue him from the decision. "What do you think?" he asked. Claire answered quietly. "It doesn't matter what I think." Daniel held her gaze. She continued. "You should decide because you want the work or because you don't." Her voice softened. "Just don't let fear answer before you do." Daniel looked down at the job description. For 3 years, fear had sounded practical. Steady job, small responsibility, safe decisions. He had called it rebuilding. Maybe some of it had been. Maybe some of it had simply been hiding in a life that no longer asked him to touch the part of himself Laura had loved most. Daniel placed one hand on the paper. "I'll take it." Eleanor nodded. Daniel added, "On one condition." A board member smiled faintly. "You haven't even negotiated salary." "This isn't about salary." The smile disappeared. Daniel looked around the table. "Every structural inspection gets a name." Eleanor frowned slightly. Daniel continued. "No anonymous approvals. No report that says engineering reviewed it without saying which engineer. Every deferral gets a responsible person attached." He thought of Laura. "If somebody says a structure is safe, their name goes on the decision." Eleanor looked toward corporate safety. Helen nodded. "Reasonable." Eleanor looked back at Daniel. "Agreed." Daniel exhaled. Something inside him settled, not disappeared, settled. The meeting ended shortly after noon. Ray caught Daniel outside the boardroom. "You really taking it?" Daniel nodded. Ray smiled. "Good." Daniel looked at him. "You testified." Ray's smile faded. "Should have done it 2 years ago." Daniel shook his head. "You did it today." Ray stared at him. Daniel understood the look. He had worn it himself, the need to turn regret into punishment. Daniel put one hand on Ray's shoulder. "Go home to your wife." Ray nodded. He walked toward the elevator. Claire remained near the boardroom door speaking with legal counsel. Daniel waited. When she finished, she walked toward him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Claire looked at the document in his hand. "Regional Structural Safety Manager." Daniel nodded. "Apparently." "Sounds important. I was hoping for shorter business cards." Claire smiled. They walked toward the elevator. Daniel pressed the button. Claire glanced at him. "You didn't have to take it." "I know." "Good." The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. Daniel looked toward her. "I wanted to." Claire's expression softened. "That's different." The doors closed. For the first time since Friday night, neither of them looked worried about standing too close. Outside the headquarters, the lake stretched beneath a pale winter sky. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. "Did you win the meeting?" Daniel stared at the screen. Claire glanced toward him. "What?" He showed her. Claire smiled. "What are you going to say?" Daniel typed. "Meetings don't have winners." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Sophie's reply came back. "That means you won." Daniel laughed. Claire laughed with him. He put the phone away. They stood beside their cars. Cold wind moved across the parking lot. Claire tucked her hair behind one ear. Daniel noticed. She noticed him noticing. Neither pretended otherwise. "Daniel?" "Yeah." Claire looked toward the headquarters building. "Your new position doesn't report to me." "I read that part." "Good." He waited. Claire looked back at him. "There are still policies." "I assumed there would be." "And an investigation is still open." "I know. And this week has been insane." "Definitely." Claire nodded. Daniel could see her building a wall sentence by sentence, not because she wanted distance, because distance was what she knew how to build when something mattered. He stepped slightly closer, not touching. "Claire." She looked at him. "I am not asking you for anything today." Her shoulders loosened a fraction. Daniel continued. "But I'm also not going to pretend Friday didn't matter just because Grant tried to make it ugly." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "It mattered." Daniel nodded. "Okay, okay." "That's enough." Her mouth curved. "You've become surprisingly reasonable." "Temporary condition." Claire smiled. Daniel opened his truck door. Before he got in, she said, "Daniel." He turned. "I'm glad you ran toward the crane." His expression changed. Claire immediately understood she had touched something deeper than she intended. Daniel looked toward the distant lake, then back at her. "So am I." He got into the truck. The drive home took 25 minutes. For the first time in years, Daniel did not take the familiar route. He turned toward the lakeshore, not because he was avoiding home, because he was not in a hurry to escape his own thoughts. The water was dark. Ice had begun gathering near the rocks. He parked at an overlook and sat with the engine running. The new job offer rested on the passenger seat. Daniel looked at it. 3 years ago, his engineering license had felt like evidence from another man's life. Now he could imagine opening the old books again, calling the licensing board, taking courses, working through calculations. The idea frightened him. He let it. His phone rang. "Aaron." Daniel answered. "Hello? You're alive. So far. I heard about the crane." "From who?" "This is Duluth. A man sneezes at the port and half the city knows before lunch." Daniel smiled. "Everyone's okay?" "I know." A pause. "Claire, okay?" Daniel looked at the lake. "Yeah." Aaron went quiet. Daniel noticed. "What?" "Nothing." "Aaron, I am thinking. That's always dangerous." She ignored him. "Daniel Mercer." His hand tightened around the phone. "What?" "Your last name." Daniel stared through the windshield. "Yes." "Why did I never ask your last name?" "I don't know." Another pause, then Aaron said very slowly, "I need to call my sister." Daniel closed his eyes. "Aaron." She had already ended the call. Aaron called Claire less than 30 seconds after hanging up on Daniel. Claire answered on the second ring. "Please tell me this is not about work." "It is worse." Claire stopped walking. She had just reached her apartment door, still carrying the folder from the board meeting. "What happened?" "Daniel Mercer." Silence. Aaron continued. "The Daniel Mercer from the crane." Claire closed her eyes. "Yes." "The Daniel Mercer from Sophie's soccer team." "Yes." Another silence. Then Aaron said, "You have got to be kidding me." Claire unlocked the door. "I did not know." "You have worked with him for over a year." "I knew Daniel Mercer. You told me I was meeting Daniel." "You knew I had a friend named Daniel." "You know several people named Daniel." "Not widowed single fathers with 9-year-old daughters." Claire stepped inside and dropped her keys into a bowl. Apparently details would have helped. Aaron made an offended sound. "You let me arrange a blind date between you and your own employee." "Former employee in my direct reporting structure now." "That is not helping." Claire laughed. She could not stop herself. It was the first laugh that had felt easy all week. Erin went quiet. Then she said, "You like him?" Claire looked toward the dark windows. Snow had started falling again over the city. "Erin, you do." Claire took off her coat. "I am hanging up. That means yes. Good night." "You are welcome." Claire ended the call. 2 days later, Erin forced both of them to sit at her kitchen table. Daniel arrived first with Sophie. Claire came 10 minutes later carrying a bottle of wine and immediately regretted it when Erin looked at the bottle and said, "Good, I deserve this." Sophie sat at the counter eating crackers while the adults tried to explain how 3 people had managed to know one another without knowing enough. Erin pointed at Daniel. "You never told me where you worked." "I said freight terminal." "That is not specific." "I was not aware I was completing a background investigation." She pointed at Claire. "And you never talk about anyone from work. That was intentional. Why?" Claire opened her mouth, then stopped. Erin lowered her hand. The teasing disappeared. Claire looked down at her glass. "Because I wanted at least one place where I was not Regional Director Bennett." Erin's expression softened. Claire continued. "At work, every decision gets measured. Every relationship gets questioned. I did not want to bring that home." Daniel watched her. Erin looked at him. "And you?" Daniel turned his coffee mug slowly between his hands. "I stopped talking about engineering after Laura died." Erin nodded. "I know." "No, you know I used to do something technical." She waited. Daniel glanced toward Sophie. His daughter was drawing at the counter, now pretending not to listen. "Engineering was the last life Laura and I had together." His voice was quiet. "I did not want to explain that every Saturday beside a soccer field." Erin leaned back. For once she had no immediate joke. Then Sophie looked over her shoulder. "So Aunt Erin did not actually set you up?" All 3 adults looked at her. Sophie shrugged. "You already knew each other." Erin pointed at her. "Exactly." She looked back at Daniel and Claire. "I did not introduce anyone." Claire smiled. Erin continued. "I just made 2 very stubborn people sit down long enough to stop pretending they were strangers." Daniel laughed. Claire looked at him. The sound did something to her. Not because it was rare anymore. Because it was becoming less rare. A week later, Claire met Sophie properly. Not at the terminal, not through Erin, not as Daniel's boss. They met at a small lakeside park where the snow had melted enough to reveal patches of brown grass near the walking path. Daniel brought hot chocolate. Sophie brought a folder full of drawings. Claire arrived carrying nothing but nerves. Sophie studied her for nearly a full minute. Claire finally smiled. "Should I be worried?" Sophie considered it. "Were you really Dad's boss?" Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. Claire nodded. "I was." "That sounds complicated." "It was." Sophie looked at Daniel. "Is she still your boss?" "No." "Good." Daniel frowned. "Why good?" "Because dating your boss sounds like something people make movies about when everything goes wrong." Claire covered a laugh with her hand. Daniel looked at his daughter. "You are spending too much time online. I am 9. "Exactly." Sophie opened her folder. She pulled out a drawing of Lake Superior. A cargo ship crossed the center of the page beneath a purple sunset. This one had no sails, Claire noticed. "Very realistic." Sophie nodded seriously. "Dad complained." I offered technical guidance. "You complained?" Claire smiled. Sophie held the drawing toward her. "You can have it." Claire paused. "Are you sure?" I made another one. Claire took the paper carefully. She did not fold it. She opened her bag and placed it between 2 folders so the corners would not bend. Daniel noticed. He said nothing. That evening, Claire taped the drawing to her refrigerator. It was the first personal thing she had added to the apartment in months. 2 weeks later, Daniel drove alone to a cemetery outside Minneapolis. He had not told Claire. He had not told Sophie. Snow remained beneath the trees where sunlight could not reach. Laura's grave stood near the end of a quiet row. Daniel brushed away the thin layer of ice from the stone. He stood there for a long time. No speech prepared. No dramatic confession. Finally, he placed both hands inside his coat pockets. I went back. Wind moved through the bare branches. Daniel looked down. I took the job. He smiled faintly. You would probably say it took me long enough. His throat tightened. He let it. For years, every visit had ended with an apology. Sorry for leaving engineering. Sorry for being angry. Sorry for moving north. Sorry for laughing again. This time, Daniel did not apologize. He touched the top of the stone once, then walked back to his truck. 3 weeks after the crane failure, Grant Keller was formally terminated. The company audit found additional maintenance deferrals across 2 terminals. Ray kept his pension and agreed to remain through the investigation before retiring. Daniel began the process of restoring his engineering license. The first time he opened one of his old textbooks, he sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour without turning the page. Then Sophie dropped into the chair beside him and asked what a load path was. Daniel explained. By the end of the evening, they had covered 3 pages with badly drawn beams. Claire changed, too. She still worked hard. She still arrived before most people. But twice that month, she left the office before 6. The first evening felt wrong. The second felt strange. The third felt almost normal. She unpacked the boxes in her spare bedroom. She found old photographs, books, a ceramic bowl Aaron had made in college and insisted was art. Claire put it on a shelf. One Friday evening, Daniel called. Are you busy? Claire looked at the unfinished report on her desk. Probably. That was not the question. She smiled. No. Good. An hour later, they stood inside Harbor House. The hostess looked at them. Table preference. Daniel and Claire exchanged a glance. 9, they said together. The hostess smiled. Right this way. The table looked exactly the same. White cloth, small candle, lake beyond the glass. Nothing had changed. Everything had. Claire sat across from him. No surprises this time. Daniel looked around. I make no promises. Dinner came slowly. They talked about Sophie, Daniel's license requirements, Claire's terrible cactus history, Ray's retirement party, Aaron's ongoing belief that she deserved permanent credit for their relationship. At some point, Claire placed her hand on the table. Daniel noticed. The first time they sat there, every movement had felt dangerous. Now he reached across, covered her hand with his. Claire looked at him. You know this is technically our second date. Daniel shook his head. I am counting the first one as an administrative error. She laughed. His phone buzzed. A message from Aaron. Sophie is staying here tonight. Do not suddenly remember laundry. Daniel showed Claire. She read it and smiled. She is never going to stop. No. Does that bother you? Daniel placed the phone face down. Not tonight. Outside, snow began falling over Duluth again. Inside, Daniel stayed exactly where he was. For years, he had believed peace meant knowing what happened next. Same mornings, same roads, same dinner table, same safe life. Now Claire's hand rested beneath his. His daughter was laughing somewhere across town. Engineering books were open again on his kitchen table. And for once, Daniel did not need the future arranged in front of him. Claire squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Neither hurried dinner.